The ice-covered cliff face behind Tobias Brenner's cabin had become part of the structure itself, creating a natural fortress that maintained 45 degrees inside, while the valley temperature plunged to -50 during the killing freeze of 1857. While every freestanding cabin in Elk Valley shattered like kindling from frost-heaved foundations and ice-weighted roofs, Tobias sat warming his hands by a small fire, protected by the mountain he'd built into rather than away from. Let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more remarkable survival stories from history. The rescue party from Fort Laramie broke through the snow barrier into Elk Valley on February 19, 1857, expecting to find the usual aftermath of a severe winter: collapsed cabins, frozen families, and scattered survivors huddled in whatever shelter remained. The freeze had been unprecedented, with temperatures holding below -40 for 3 consecutive weeks. Ice storms had added crushing weight to roofs, while frost heaves shattered foundations from below. No structure in the Wyoming Territory had escaped damage. Captain William Stanton led his men toward the western cliff face, where the most isolated homestead stood, or had stood, according to common expectation. Tobias Brenner had built directly against the granite cliff, a choice that provoked ridicule from other settlers who considered proper distance from rockfall essential. The approach revealed something extraordinary. While passing 12 destroyed cabins on the valley floor, each reduced to splintered logs and scattered debris, Brenner's structure appeared intact. The cabin seemed to grow from the cliff itself. Its back wall was the living rock face, its side walls anchored directly into granite. The roof, instead of carrying crushing snow loads, showed bare wooden shakes where the cliff's overhang had protected it. Most remarkably, smoke rose steadily from the chimney, a sign of life where none should exist. The front door opened before they could knock, and Tobias Brenner stood there in his shirt sleeves, as if -50 degrees wasn't howling 10 feet away. Inside revealed careful integration between human construction and natural formation. The granite cliff face formed the entire back wall, sealed where necessary but largely left as bare stone. This rock surface radiated gentle warmth absorbed from the cabin's interior heat, creating a massive thermal battery. The side walls, built from logs, were anchored into the cliff using iron pins driven into drilled holes. The construction appeared to be half traditional cabin, half excavated shelter. Stanton's men explored in amazement, finding a workshop carved directly into a natural cavity in the cliff, storage areas utilizing rock shelves, and a sleeping area where the stone face had been minimally modified to create a comfortable alcove. The thermometer read 45 degrees without any roaring fire, just a modest blaze in a fireplace built into a natural chimney formation in the cliff. The impossible had occurred through integration rather than isolation. The surviving neighbors who had fled to the fort told tales of mocking Brenner's construction for 6 years. They called it quote, "andro," deriding his choice to build where rockslides might crush him, where spring melt would surely flood him, where no proper homesteader would choose to live. Now their proper cabins lay in ruins, while the man who built against conventional wisdom sat warm and comfortable. Understanding required going back to when tragedy taught Tobias Brenner that standard construction was fatally flawed. March 12, 1851, dawned clear and warm in Elk Valley, the kind of false spring day that made mountain winters particularly treacherous. Tobias Brenner had built his cabin in the valley's center, following standard practice of avoiding cliff faces, where rockfall and avalanches posed constant threats. His wife, Margaret, tended their twin daughters, aged 3, while Tobias split wood 50 yards from their door. The snow on the eastern slopes had accumulated all winter, building cornices that hung like frozen waves above the tree line. The sound began as a whisper, then grew to a roar that shook the ground. Tobias looked up to see the entire eastern slope in motion, a white wall 300 feet wide descending at locomotive speed. He screamed Margaret's name while running toward the cabin, but mathematics made rescue impossible. The avalanche struck with the force of 1,000 tons, exploding the cabin into matchsticks before burying everything under 30 feet of concrete hard debris. Tobias was caught at the edge and tumbled violently, but thrown clear by the slide's momentum. When the roaring stopped and snow dust settled, silence fell over a landscape transformed. Where his home had stood, only disturbed snow remained, already settling and compressing. He dug with bare hands until they bled, calling names that would never answer. Other settlers arrived by afternoon with shovels and poles, but the compressed snow had become harder than ice. They found the cabin's remains the next day, crushed flat as paper beneath tons of snow. Margaret and the twins had died instantly when the roof collapsed, a mercy that provided no comfort. The recovery took 3 days of careful excavation. Tobias buried his family in the small cemetery on the South Hill, marking graves with stones that seemed pitifully small against the mountains that had killed them. Standard construction had offered no protection against the valley's deadliest threat. The following weeks passed in a grief-stricken haze while Tobias lived in a neighbor's barn, but his mind worked constantly, analyzing the avalanche's behavior. He noticed how the slide had followed predictable terrain features, how it had split around resistant obstacles, how certain locations remained untouched despite proximity to the destruction. The cliff faces that everyone avoided had stood unmoved while the avalanche raged past. Trees growing against rock faces survived while isolated trees snapped like twigs. The revelation came while observing spring avalanches from safe distances. Slides followed paths of least resistance, building momentum in open areas while deflecting around anchored obstacles. The settlers' practice of building away from cliffs actually placed them in avalanche runways. The safest locations were where everyone feared to build, tight against immovable rock faces, where avalanches would split and pass by. The mountain itself could provide protection if one built with it rather than despite it. This understanding would drive Tobias to attempt construction everyone would consider insane. Tobias Brenner spent the summer of 1851 studying Elk Valley's cliff faces with the intensity of a man whose sanity depended on understanding stone. Each granite wall told stories written in cracks, stains, and vegetation patterns. Watermarks showed maximum flood levels. Lichen growth indicated stable surfaces undisturbed for decades. Most importantly, debris patterns at cliff bases revealed avalanche behavior. Some faces split sliding snow, while others channeled it away from their foundations. The western cliff drew particular attention. Rising 200 feet above the valley floor, its face angled back at 70 degrees, too steep for snow accumulation, but perfect for deflection. Ancient rockfall had created a natural platform 30 feet up, where centuries of soil accumulation supported massive pines. These trees proved the platform's stability. More intriguingly, the cliff face showed thermal characteristics that fascinated Tobias. Morning sun struck the granite early, warming it throughout the day. Evening shadows fell while rock still radiated heat. Native hunting parties passing through shared knowledge when Tobias offered tobacco and coffee. The Shoshone had wintered in these valleys for generations, and their campsites clustered near cliff faces rather than open meadows. They explained through gestures and broken English how rock walls blocked wind, collected sun warmth, and provided emergency shelter. One elder showed scorch marks on granite, where his grandfather's grandfather had built warming fires, the rock still blackened after countless seasons. Tobias filled notebooks with observations. He measured temperatures at various distances from cliff faces, finding differences of 20 degrees within 50 feet. He studied how snow accumulated, discovering wind eddies that kept areas directly against cliffs relatively clear while building massive drifts further out. He watched how spring melt occurred, noting that cliff-adjacent snow disappeared weeks before open-ground accumulation. Every observation contradicted conventional wisdom about building placement. The specific site selection took months. Tobias needed southern exposure for solar warming, protection from prevailing winds, elevation above flood stage, stable rock without fracture patterns, suggesting future failure, and access to water without avalanche exposure. The western cliff offered everything at a location where natural rock formation created a 17-foot-deep alcove, not quite a cave, but significant shelter. The overhang would protect against precipitation, while the recessed area provided wind protection. By September, Tobias had documented patterns no settler had previously considered. Cliff faces weren't uniform death traps, but varied drastically in their characteristics. Some channeled danger, while others deflected it. Some remained cold and shadowed, while others collected and radiated warmth. Most significantly, the thermal mass of massive rock formations created microclimates that moderated temperature extremes. Building against the right cliff face wouldn't invite disaster. It would provide protection superior to any freestanding structure. This understanding would guide construction that violated every established principle while proving superior to conventional methods. The land auction in Cheyenne on November 3, 1851, presented an opportunity that only Tobias Brenner recognized as valuable. Parcel 47. West consisted of 40 acres butted against the western cliff face. Land considered worthless by conventional standards. No flat ground for farming, no meadows for grazing. Access required crossing Beaver Creek. Most damning, the entire parcel sat in what settlers called the rockfall zone. Though Tobias's careful observations had shown no evidence of recent geological activity. Bidding opened at the federal minimum of $1.25 per acre. The auctioneer, Harold Morrison, actually apologized for including such marginal land. Quote, 2, he stated diplomatically. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew this meant the land was essentially worthless. When Tobias raised his hand to bid, whispers of sympathy arose. Clearly the widower's grief had affected his judgment. No competing bids emerged. Tobias acquired 40 acres for $50, the minimum federal price. The land clerk, filling out paperwork, tried to redirect him toward better parcels. The Simmons plot has good soil and river access, he suggested kindly. But Tobias insisted on the cliff land. The transaction completed amid headshakes and muttered comments about mountain madness. Several men approached afterward, offering to help him reconsider before the filing became final. The reaction in Elk Valley was uniform disbelief. William Patterson, whose cabin sat on prime meadowland, voiced the common sentiment. Brenner's thrown away his money on vertical rock and shadows. Mary Henderson worried aloud about Tobias's mental state, suggesting the community should intervene. But Tobias had already begun ordering supplies that puzzled merchants further. From Denver came specialized masonry drills designed for railroad tunnel construction. From California, shipbuilders' caulking compounds meant for sealing hulls against ocean pressure. His tool purchases revealed methodical planning rather than madness. Rock anchors used in mining operations, expansion bolts that could secure loads to granite faces, specialized chisels for shaping stone, measuring instruments for calculating precise angles. The expense exceeded his land purchase threefold. When questioned about these unusual acquisitions, Tobias simply stated he was building for permanence. The merchants shrugged. Grief made men do strange things. By December, Tobias had established a temporary camp at his cliff base and begun the careful work of site preparation. He cleared deadfall and minor debris, revealing the granite face's true character. The natural alcove he'd identified proved even more suitable than initial observations suggested. Spring seepage had carved drainage channels that would prevent water accumulation, The overhang extended further than visible from below, offering more protection. What others saw as a forbidding cliff face, Tobias recognized as half a house already built by nature, requiring only human ingenuity to complete. The forbidden purchase would become the foundation for construction that defied every frontier convention. The first hole Tobias Brenner drilled into the granite cliff face on April 7, 1852, marked the beginning of construction unlike anything attempted in the Wyoming Territory. Using techniques borrowed from railroad tunnel builders, he began creating anchor points that would marry human construction to geological formation. Each hole required hours of patient work with a star drill and sledgehammer, the metallic ringing echoing across the valley and drawing curious observers who couldn't comprehend his intentions. The anchoring system revealed ingenious planning. Rather than fighting the cliff's irregular surface, Tobias mapped every protrusion and recession, designing his structure to complement natural contours. He drilled holes at precisely calculated angles, following granite grain patterns to maximize holding strength. Into these holes went iron anchor bolts with expanding sleeves, technology used for securing railroad bridges to canyon walls. When tightened, these anchors could support thousands of pounds without budging. The foundation proved revolutionary. Instead of laying a flat base that frost could heave, Tobias used the cliff's natural shelves as starting points. He identified a granite ledge 4 feet above ground level that extended 12 feet along the cliff face. This became his primary floor support, eliminating ground contact entirely. Additional supports consisted of massive logs anchored directly to the cliff at multiple points, creating a framework that hung from the mountain rather than resting on earth. By May, the skeleton structure emerged. Vertical posts rose from the granite ledge, each secured to the cliff with 3 separate anchor points. Horizontal beams connected these posts, but rather than bearing weight traditionally, they distributed loads back into the cliff face. The design borrowed from bridge engineering, the cliff served as an immovable abutment while the cabin essentially cantilevered from it. No amount of frost heave could affect a structure that didn't touch the ground. The integration went beyond mere attachment. Tobias carved channels in protruding rock to accept log ends perfectly. He shaped beams to match cliff contours, creating seamless joints between wood and stone. Where the granite face formed natural hollows, he incorporated them as storage alcoves. A vertical fissure became a chimney channel. The construction didn't impose human design on natural formation, but rather discovered the building already implied in the stone. Local reaction ranged from bewilderment to alarm. Several settlers rode out specifically to warn Tobias about inevitable rockfall. Thomas Morrison predicted the first temperature change would crack the granite and crush everything. Sarah Patterson worried about spring floods undermining the cliff base. But Tobias continued methodically, each anchor tested to 3 times expected load, each joint sealed against moisture infiltration. His notebooks filled with calculations, thermal expansion rates, load distributions, water drainage patterns. The marriage of wood to stone proceeded with scientific precision that frontier construction rarely exhibited. By month's end, a framework existed that would prove more durable than any traditional structure, anchored to stone that had endured millennia. June 1852 saw Tobias Brenner's construction evolve from anchored framework into true hybrid architecture, part traditional cabin, part cave dwelling, wholly integrated with the cliff face. The design philosophy rejected conventional separation between natural and built environments. Where standard cabins fought their surroundings with barriers and gaps, Tobias created seamless transitions that made the mountain itself part of his home's structural and thermal system. The rear wall exemplified this integration. Rather than building a wooden wall against the cliff, Tobias left the granite exposed wherever possible. He carefully cleaned the rock surface, removing loose material while preserving stable features. Natural shelves became storage spaces, protruding formations served as coat hooks and tool hangers. Where the rock face wasn't perfectly vertical, he didn't correct it. Irregular surfaces created visual interest while providing better thermal performance than flat walls. Sealing techniques borrowed from shipbuilding proved crucial. Where wood met stone, Tobias used oakum soaked in pine tar, creating flexible joints that could accommodate differential movement. He discovered that granite expanded and contracted with temperature changes, though less than wood. His sealed joints allowed this movement without breaking watertight integrity. Additional protection came from overlapping wooden battens that directed water away from sealed areas while permitting air circulation to prevent rot. The roof design challenged every frontier convention. Standard cabins used steep peaks to shed snow, accepting massive structural loads. Tobias built a low-angle roof that used the cliff's overhang as primary protection. The roof essentially became a lean-to against granite, with minimal exposure to precipitation. Where traditional builders feared ice dams, Tobias encouraged them. Ice forming where roof met cliff created additional insulation and weather sealing. The design required perfect drainage to prevent summer flooding, achieved through carefully calculated gutters carved into both wood and stone. Interior spaces flowed between constructed and natural areas. The main living area occupied the built portion, with wooden floors and walls providing familiar comfort. But stepping toward the cliff face transitioned into modified cave space. Tobias enlarged the natural alcove minimally, creating a sleeping chamber that needed no construction beyond smoothing the floor. The temperature in this rock chamber remained constant year-round, requiring neither heating nor cooling. A cooking area utilized a natural chimney formation, directing smoke up through cliff fissures. Windows presented unique opportunities. Rather than cutting openings that weakened structure, Tobias positioned windows between anchor points where no load-bearing occurred. Some windows framed views outward, while others looked up at the cliff face, bringing the mountain's presence inside. The largest window faced southeast, capturing morning sun that would warm the interior stone mass. This passive solar heating, combined with the cliff's thermal mass, would moderate temperatures beyond anything conventional construction achieved. By July, visitors struggled to categorize what they saw. Neither cabin nor cave, the structure defied conventional description. The logs and wooden elements appeared to grow from the stone itself. The mountain hadn't been conquered or avoided, but invited to participate in creating shelter. This philosophical shift would prove as important as technical innovation. The critical phase of construction began in August 1852, when Tobias Brenner developed revolutionary methods for sealing the junction between organic wood and inorganic stone. This interface would determine whether his hybrid structures succeeded or failed catastrophically. Traditional building never faced this challenge. Wood met wood, stone met stone, but rarely did materials with such different properties require permanent marriage. Tobias spent weeks perfecting techniques that would prove crucial. The primary challenge stemmed from differential expansion. Wood swelled and contracted with moisture changes, while granite moved minutely with temperature. Fixed, rigid connections would inevitably fail as materials fought each other. Tobias's solution drew from observing natural phenomena, how tree roots penetrated rock cracks without shattering stone, how ice formed flexible bonds between disparate surfaces. He developed a 3-layer sealing system that accommodated movement while maintaining weather-tight integrity. The first layer consisted of dried moss packed into gaps between wood and stone. This natural material compressed and expanded readily, while providing basic water resistance. Native peoples had used similar techniques for generations, but Tobias refined the approach. He selected specific moss varieties that remained pliable when dry, avoiding types that became brittle. The moss created a breathing buffer zone that prevented direct contact between materials with different expansion rates. Over the moss went a mixture Tobias developed through experimentation: pine pitch combined with crushed charcoal and rendered bear fat. This compound remained flexible at all temperatures while repelling water. He applied it hot, working it deep into the moss layer, where it created a waterproof but elastic membrane. The bear fat prevented the pitch from becoming brittle in extreme cold, while charcoal provided structural body. Multiple thin applications proved superior to single thick layers. The final exterior layer used overlapping wooden battens cut from naturally weather-resistant cedar. These weren't merely cosmetic but functional, directing water away from sealed joints while allowing air circulation behind them. Tobias shaped each batten to follow stone contours precisely, creating channels that moved water predictably. The battens attached with wooden pegs rather than iron nails, preventing thermal conductivity that could create condensation points. Testing revealed remarkable success. Tobias subjected sealed sections to extreme conditions, alternating between soaking water and below freezing temperatures. The joints held perfectly, flexing with material movement while maintaining complete weather resistance. He discovered that the system actually improved over time as materials settled into optimal positions. The moss compressed into exact spaces, while pitch amalgamated with wood resins. What seemed complex during installation became a self-maintaining system. By September, every junction between cliff and cabin bore this triple protection. The result appeared seamless. Wooden structures flowed into stone surfaces without visible transition. Water striking these joints ran off harmlessly. Wind found no gaps to exploit. Temperature changes caused no failures as materials moved independently within flexible constraints. The sealing system would prove crucial when winter tested every weakness. Local builders studied the technique with growing respect, recognizing innovation born from necessity rather than theory. November 15, 1853, brought the first major test of Tobias Brenner's cliff-integrated cabin when an early blizzard slammed into Elk Valley with unexpected fury. The storm arrived from the northwest, driving snow horizontally at 60 miles per hour. Traditional cabins faced the full assault. Wind tore at roof shingles, snow built massive drifts against walls, and the temperature plummeted to -20 within hours. Settlers frantically stoked fires and battened shutters. Tobias experienced the storm differently. The cliff face that formed his rear wall blocked the wind completely, creating a pocket of relative calm. Snow that would have buried a freestanding cabin's north wall instead shot up and over the cliff, depositing far beyond his structure. The low-angle roof, protected by granite overhang, accumulated minimal snow. Most remarkably, the massive stone wall began radiating stored heat as outside temperatures dropped, moderating the interior climate naturally. The contrast with neighboring homesteads became evident within hours. William Patterson's cabin, fully exposed on the meadow, shook violently with each gust. Snow accumulated 4 feet deep on his windward wall, the weight straining the structure audibly. Inside, despite a roaring fire, temperatures near the north wall approached freezing. Ice formed on interior surfaces where wind-driven cold penetrated chinking. The family huddled near their stove, burning through their wood supply at alarming rates. Tobias's cabin remained eerily quiet. The cliff muffled wind noise while preventing structural stress. His modest fire sufficed to maintain comfortable temperatures as the granite wall contributed stored thermal energy. The sealed joints between wood and stone showed no infiltration. Neither wind nor moisture found entry. Most surprisingly, the natural chimney formation in the cliff created perfect draft regardless of wind direction, while conventional chimneys struggled with downdrafts. The storm intensified overnight, bringing thunder snow, a rare phenomenon where lightning accompanies blizzard conditions. Patterson later reported fearing his cabin would collapse as walls flexed under wind pressure. Drifts reached his windowsills by dawn. Meanwhile, Tobias slept undisturbed, the cliff-sheltered structure barely acknowledging the tempest. Morning revealed dramatic differences. Where freestanding cabins stood imprisoned by surrounding drifts, Tobias's entrance remained clear. Wind patterns around the cliff had scoured rather than deposited snow. Temperature readings proved most telling. Despite minimal fuel consumption, Tobias maintained steady 50-degree interior temperatures throughout the storm. The granite wall surface felt warm to touch, massive thermal mass releasing summer's accumulated heat. Patterson's cabin, burning wood continuously, barely achieved 40 degrees while consuming precious fuel reserves. The storm that threatened traditional structures had blessed Tobias with validation. His integration with natural protection surpassed any artificial shelter. Post-storm assessment revealed no damage to the cliff cabin. Sealed joints held perfectly. The roof shed its minimal snow load naturally. The structure appeared to have weathered a gentle rain rather than a violent blizzard. Neighbors who inspected the results found themselves reconsidering previous mockery. The Folly had performed brilliantly, while conventional wisdom shivered and strained. Spring 1854 revealed unexpected benefits of Tobias Brenner's cliff integration beyond storm protection. As snow melted throughout Elk Valley, the granite face behind his cabin began its annual transformation. What had served as windbreak and thermal mass through winter now demonstrated additional provisions that no freestanding structure could match. The mountain itself became an active partner in creating optimal living conditions. The first gift came as water. Snowmelt from the clifftop, rather than creating problems, followed channels Tobias had observed and enhanced. Natural fissures in the granite directed flow away from living spaces while creating a reliable water source. He installed wooden gutters at strategic points, capturing clean runoff in barrels. This gravity-fed system provided water pressure impossible for valley floor cabins dependent on wells or stream hauling. Temperature moderation continued impressing through seasonal transitions. As days warmed but nights remained cold, the cliff's thermal mass smoothed variations that made traditional cabins uncomfortable. The granite absorbed excess heat during sunny afternoons, preventing interior overheating. At night, it released warmth gradually, maintaining temperatures while other cabins experienced 40-degree swings. This natural climate control required no operation or maintenance. Physics handled everything automatically. Unexpected agricultural benefits emerged. The cliff face created a microclimate extending roughly 20 feet from its base. Snow melted earlier here while frost arrived later. The reflected sunlight and radiated warmth allowed Tobias to plant vegetables 2 weeks before neighbors and harvest 3 weeks after. His small garden, tucked against the protective stone, produced yields that amazed experienced farmers. Tomatoes thrived where conventional wisdom said they couldn't grow. The cliff provided construction materials continuously. Winter freeze-thaw cycles loosened small stones perfect for maintenance and improvements. Spring erosion exposed clay deposits ideal for chinking repairs. Mineral seepage created natural preservatives for wood treatment. Rather than depleting resources like timber-dependent cabins, the cliff-integrated structure found renewal in natural processes. Each season brought materials exactly when needed. Wildlife benefits surprised everyone. The cliff's thermal mass attracted beneficial insects earlier in spring, providing pollination for extended growing seasons. Swallows nested in protected cliff crevices, consuming mosquitoes that plagued valley settlements. The rock face's complex surface created habitat niches supporting predators of crop pests. The integrated structure fostered an ecosystem that enhanced rather than competed with human habitation. Social dynamics shifted as success became undeniable. Neighbors who had mocked now visited regularly, studying the harmonious relationship between built and natural elements. Thomas Morrison, previously vocal about rockfall dangers, admitted the cliff showed no signs of instability. Sarah Patterson brought seedlings to test in Tobias's microclimate garden. The mountain that everyone feared had revealed itself as provider and protector when approached with understanding rather than antagonism. By summer, Tobias documented dozens of benefits never anticipated. The cliff provided shelter, water, warmth, cooling, materials, and enhanced growing conditions. It demanded nothing in return: no fuel consumption, no structural maintenance, no resource depletion. The marriage of human needs with geological assets created abundance where others saw only obstacles. Despite proven success through multiple seasons, summer 1854 brought intensified ridicule of Tobias Brenner's cliff dwelling from new arrivals in Elk Valley. The territorial expansion had attracted settlers from eastern states, where proper civilization meant maximum separation from wild nature. These newcomers viewed Tobias's integration with the cliff face as regression to primitive conditions, threatening the social order they sought to establish on the frontier. Jonathan Whitmore, arriving from Philadelphia with substantial capital and rigid ideas about architectural propriety, became the leading voice against cliff building. "Brenner lives like a caveman," he declared at the new General Store's gathering. Quote, 7. Whitmore's own construction project, a two-story frame house with imported materials, represented everything Tobias's dwelling rejected: separation from nature, resource consumption, and style over function. The social campaign grew organized. Whitmore's wife, Eleanor, established a civic beautification committee specifically targeting eyesore dwellings that degraded property values. Though never naming Tobias directly, her speeches clearly referenced certain residents who choose to burrow into cliffsides like animals rather than build proper Christian homes. The committee attracted recent arrivals who associated traditional architecture with moral superiority. Economic arguments bolstered social pressure. Whitmore claimed cliff dwellings would deter investment and respectable families from settling in Elk Valley. He predicted property values would plummet if architectural anarchy spread. The new banker, Harold Fitzgerald, initially refused to consider loans for any construction that incorporated natural formations, citing inability to properly assess such properties. The message became clear: conform to Eastern standards or face economic isolation. Religious overtones complicated matters further. The newly arrived minister, Reverend Dalton, preached sermons about mankind's dominion over nature, suggesting that hiding in caves showed lack of faith in human capability. Though avoiding direct reference, his messages clearly targeted anyone who, quote, 13, quote, several congregants began shunning Tobias at community gatherings. The intensity puzzled original settlers who had witnessed Tobias's success through brutal winters. William Patterson found himself defending the cliff dwelling to newcomers who hadn't experienced the valley's weather extremes. "Wait until January," he advised Whitmore, "then discuss proper construction." But summer confidence dismissed such warnings. The frame house rose quickly, its eastern design imposing but poorly adapted to mountain conditions. Tobias responded to escalating mockery with quiet dignity. He continued improving his dwelling, adding touches that enhanced both function and appearance. Window boxes brightened the facade. Carved details softened the transition between wood and stone. The garden expanded, providing produce when others struggled with late frost. Actions spoke louder than words, but social pressure created genuine isolation. The community divided between pragmatists who recognized merit and idealists who saw only deviation from civilized norms. The approaching winter would arbitrate this cultural conflict with brutal clarity. Autumn 1854 saw Tobias Brenner expand his dwelling in ways that further violated conventional construction, while demonstrating deeper integration with the cliff's natural features. Rather than building outward as traditional expansion demanded, he worked inward, discovering and utilizing caves and fissures within the granite face. This phase transformed his home from a cabin attached to rock into a true hybrid structure where boundaries between natural and constructed space dissolved. The expansion began when Tobias noticed air movement from a crack behind his sleeping alcove. Investigation revealed a narrow passage leading to a substantial chamber within the cliff, a natural cave formed by ancient water erosion. Rather than viewing this as empty space to fill, Tobias recognized an opportunity to work with existing features. He enlarged the entrance minimally, just enough for comfortable passage, preserving the cave's natural climate control properties. The discovered chamber measured 15 by 20 feet with a 12-foot ceiling, larger than most constructed rooms. Tobias modified it thoughtfully, smoothing the floor while leaving walls largely natural. He installed wooden platforms at various heights, utilizing natural ledges for storage. The space maintained a constant 55 degrees year-round, without any heating or cooling, perfect for food preservation. Root vegetables stored here lasted months, while maintaining freshness impossible in traditional cellars. Further exploration revealed an interconnected series of smaller chambers and fissures. Tobias developed these minimally, creating specialized spaces for different purposes. A narrow chamber with natural ventilation became a smokehouse. A dry upper cavity served as grain storage. A lower area where spring water seeped created perfect conditions for aging preserved foods. Each space required only minor modification to serve human needs while maintaining natural advantages. The integration philosophy extended to living spaces. Rather than imposing rectangular rooms, Tobias followed natural contours. His workshop curved around a granite intrusion that conventional builders would have removed. This obstacle became a tool bench of incredible stability and durability. Sleeping areas nestled into natural alcoves that provided psychological comfort alongside physical shelter. The kitchen utilized a rock formation as a cooking surface that retained heat long after fires died. Construction techniques evolved to match this philosophy. Instead of cutting stone to fit predetermined plans, Tobias shaped wood to complement existing rock. He developed flexible joining methods that allowed organic forms rather than forcing rigid geometry. The result appeared to grow from the cliff rather than being imposed upon it. Visitors struggled to identify where natural cave ended and human construction began. Exactly Tobias's intention. By November, the expanded dwelling encompassed over 1,500 square feet of living space, though measuring conventional square footage missed the point. The space flowed between constructed and natural areas seamlessly. Storage capacity exceeded any traditional cabin. Temperature variation throughout the complex measured less than 10 degrees, despite no active climate control. The mountain provided structure, insulation, and regulation, while Tobias added only what enhanced these natural gifts. Original settlers marveled at the ingenuity, while newcomers saw only primitive cave dwelling. January 18, 1857, brought weather that old-timers called impossible, temperatures plummeting from 20 above to 40 below zero in 4 hours, as an Arctic mass descended with unprecedented fury. The dramatic temperature drop created conditions that destroyed conventional structures throughout Wyoming territory. Nails popped from boards as wood contracted violently. Foundation stones split from frost expansion. Window glass shattered from thermal shock. The freeze of '57 would enter territorial history as the deadliest winter event recorded. Jonathan Whitmore's showcase frame house faced immediate catastrophe. The imported lumber kiln-dried in Pennsylvania mills contracted so severely that gaps opened throughout the structure. Wind howled through spaces that hadn't existed hours earlier. The modern furnace system, pride of Eastern engineering, failed when metal components contracted and separated. Pipes froze and burst within the walls. The family huddled around a hastily built fireplace, burning furniture as temperatures inside dropped below freezing despite desperate efforts. Traditional log cabins fared better, but still suffered extensively. The Patterson family lost their windows when frames contracted away from openings. The Henderson cabin's roof separated from walls as different materials contracted at varying rates. Chinking fell from between logs like autumn leaves. Every structure dependent on multiple materials working together failed as each component responded differently to extreme temperature change. Families struggled to seal gaps with blankets and rags while burning precious fuel reserves. Tobias Brenner experienced the freeze from a position of absolute security. The granite cliff face, with its massive thermal mass, moderated the temperature shock. While outside air plummeted to -40, the rock surface cooled gradually. The integrated construction, designed to accommodate movement between wood and stone, flexed without failing. Sealed joints compressed but maintained integrity. The natural cave chambers deep within the cliff barely registered the surface catastrophe. Most remarkably, Tobias's heating requirements actually decreased. The extreme temperature differential created powerful convection currents that drew warm air from deep cave chambers through the living spaces. The mountain's stored heat, accumulated over eons, provided more warmth than any fire. While neighbors burned furniture and faced dwindling wood supplies, Tobias maintained comfortable temperatures with a single small fire for cooking. The integration with geological thermal mass proved invaluable when artificial heating failed throughout the valley. The freeze persisted for 2 weeks, breaking only gradually. During this period, 17 residents of Elk Valley died from exposure or related complications. Whitmore's family survived only by abandoning their frame house for a traditional cabin. The minister who had preached about dominion over nature suffered severe frostbite while trying to maintain his conventional parsonage. Throughout the ordeal, Tobias's cliff dwelling maintained steady temperatures, consumed minimal fuel, and suffered zero structural damage. When military rescue parties arrived from Fort Laramie, they found devastation throughout the valley except at the cliff face. Tobias had sheltered 8 neighbors during the worst days, his expanded cave chambers providing refuge when their homes became death traps. The freeze of '57 ended all mockery of cliff building. The second week of the Great Freeze brought desperate refugees to Tobias Brenner's cliff dwelling as conventional homes throughout Elk Valley failed catastrophically. First came the Hendersons. Their roof collapsed under ice weight, carrying infant twins through -40 darkness. Then the widow Martinez, her cabin's walls separated at corners when differential contraction tore the structure apart. By January 25th, 8 families huddled within Tobias's expanded cave system, discovering space and comfort none had imagined possible. The natural chambers Tobias had developed proved invaluable for emergency shelter. Each cave room maintained different but stable temperatures, the deepest holding steady at 55 degrees, while outer chambers ranged from 45 to 50. Families occupied spaces based on needs, with elderly and infants in the warmest areas. The interconnected design allowed privacy while sharing communal warmth. Natural ledges became sleeping platforms with simple bedding, creating comfortable quarters. Jonathan Whitmore's arrival marked the complete reversal of social dynamics. His showcase frame house had failed spectacularly, walls literally pulling apart as materials contracted. Pride prevented immediate evacuation until his children developed hypothermia symptoms. Eleanor Whitmore, who had labeled cliff dwelling primitive, wept with relief as the constant temperature revived her shivering daughters. The man who led mockery now depended entirely on the shelter he'd derided. Organization emerged naturally from crisis. Tobias coordinated sleeping arrangements, while refugees contributed skills. William Patterson managed fuel conservation, discovering the minimal heating needs. Mary Henderson organized food preparation, utilizing the cave's preservation chambers to stretch supplies. The widow Martinez, experienced in herbal medicine, treated frostbite cases in the stable temperature healing chamber. Community formed through necessity within stone walls that conventional society had rejected. The cliff dwelling's capacity amazed everyone. Spaces that seemed modest for one family accommodated 23 people without overcrowding. The natural ventilation prevented stuffiness despite sealed entrances. Water from the spring system served all needs without hauling through deadly cold. Most remarkably, the psychological atmosphere remained calm. The solid stone surroundings provided security that fragile wooden structures never offered during nature's assault. Children adapted fastest to cave living, discovering climbing routes and hidden passages that delighted despite circumstances. Their laughter echoing through chambers lifted adult spirits. Jonathan Whitmore watched his daughters play freely in shirt sleeves while outside temperatures would kill in minutes. The contrast with their terror in the failing frame house was profound. Eleanor began sketching the organic spaces, her artistic eye recognizing beauty where she'd previously seen only primitiveness. Days passed in unexpected comfort. Meals became communal events around the natural stone table. Evening stories entertained children while adults planned recovery. The minister held services in the largest chamber, his sermons notably absent of mankind's dominion themes. The cave that society rejected had become sanctuary for that same society. When temperatures finally moderated enough for safe travel, several families hesitated to leave. The cliff dwelling had provided not just survival, but community. Tobias's integration with nature had sheltered humanity when humanity's separation from nature proved fatal. Colonel Marcus Brighton from the Army Corps of Engineers arrived in March 1857 to investigate why Tobias Brenner's cliff dwelling survived when conventional structures throughout Wyoming Territory failed catastrophically. The military faced massive casualties from exposure in frontier posts and desperately needed better cold weather construction techniques. Brighton brought surveying, equipment, and engineering expertise to document what intuition and observation had created. The first measurements astounded Brighton's team. While outside temperatures fluctuated 40 degrees daily, interior spaces varied by only 3 degrees. The granite cliff's thermal mass exceeded calculations, thousands of tons of rock moderating temperature through sheer volume. But mass alone didn't explain the performance. Tobias's integration techniques had created synergies between natural and built elements that multiplied effectiveness beyond simple addition. Airflow patterns proved particularly sophisticated. Brighton discovered that Tobias had intuited principles of convective circulation that engineering schools barely understood. Warm air from deep caves rose through carefully positioned passages, creating continuous flow without drafts. Cold air drainage followed channels that expelled it outside rather than pooling in living spaces. The system self-regulated based on temperature differentials, requiring no operation or adjustment. The flexible sealing system between wood and stone fascinated the engineers. Where rigid connections would have failed from differential movement, Tobias's three-layer approach accommodated extreme temperature swings without compromise. Brighton tested sections by heating and cooling them rapidly. The seals compressed and expanded while maintaining perfect weatherproofing. The moss, pitch, and batten combination outperformed any industrial solution available. Structural analysis revealed ingenious load distribution. Rather than fighting gravity, Tobias had made it an ally. The cliff bore primary loads while wooden elements handled only lateral forces. The cantilever design eliminated foundation problems that destroyed conventional buildings. Each component worked in compression or tension, ideally suited to its material properties. Brighton calculated the structure could withstand forces that would demolish traditional frames. The report's conclusions challenged military construction doctrine. Brighton wrote, quote 18, "The Army began sending engineers to study under Tobias, recognizing that frontier innovation exceeded academic training. Scientific documentation spread through professional journals. The American Society of Civil Engineers published Brighton's analysis, sparking debate about fundamental assumptions. European architects studying vernacular architecture found validation for theories about indigenous wisdom. Mining engineers recognized applications for extreme environments. Railroad builders saw solutions for mountain installations. Academic institutions requested detailed drawings for curriculum development. Tobias himself found the scientific attention amusing but cooperated fully. He explained his thinking process, observing nature's solutions and adapting rather than imposing. When engineers expressed amazement at calculations he'd never performed, Tobias noted that the cliff had stood for millennia without equations. Mathematics described what already worked. They didn't create the solution. This philosophy challenged professional training that emphasized human systems over natural observation. The science of shelter was learning from someone who sheltered successfully without formal science. Summer 1857 brought dozens of attempted replications of Tobias Brenner's cliff-dwelling design throughout the Rocky Mountain region, but results varied dramatically. The success that seemed straightforward when observing Tobias's integrated structure proved difficult to achieve without understanding underlying principles. Many settlers, inspired by survival stories from the Great Freeze, sought cliffside locations without comprehending the careful analysis required for suitable sites. The Jameson brothers represented typical early failures. They identified a limestone cliff near Cheyenne and began excavation enthusiastically. However, limestone's properties differed entirely from granite. It absorbed water, lacked thermal mass density, and fractured unpredictably. Their first chamber collapsed during construction, nearly killing Thomas Jameson. The brothers abandoned the project, declaring cliff building impossible without Brenner's specific mountain. Such failures initially discouraged widespread adoption. Successful replications came from those who studied principles rather than copying forms. Marcus Sheffield, an engineer who spent weeks with Tobias, identified a suitable basalt formation near Fort Collins. Understanding that rock type mattered less than proper integration techniques, Sheffield adapted the design to basalt's columnar structure. His dwelling utilized natural vertical fractures for ventilation while respecting the stone's different thermal properties. The result functioned brilliantly, proving concepts could transfer with intelligent modification. Material selection emerged as critical. Many failures stemmed from forcing incompatible materials together, using standard lumber against rock faces, applying rigid sealants, or ignoring natural drainage. Sarah Wellington, a widow who successfully built into sandstone cliffs, spent months testing compatibility between her chosen stone and various wood species. She discovered cottonwood expanded similarly to sandstone, reducing joint stress. Such careful matching proved essential for long-term success. Site selection separated successes from disasters. Tobias emphasized studying water patterns, frost lines, and geological stability across seasons before building. Impatient settlers who rushed construction faced spring floods, unexpected rockfall, or thermal bridges that defeated insulation purposes. The Martinez family spent a full year observing their chosen cliff before construction, marking water flow, temperature variations, and wildlife usage. Their patience resulted in a dwelling rivaling Tobias's original for performance. Technical knowledge transfer became crucial. Tobias developed a teaching method combining hands-on demonstration with principle explanation. He created sample joint sections showing proper sealing techniques. He taught rock reading, identifying stable versus unstable formations. Most importantly, he emphasized thinking with rather than against natural forces. Students who grasped this philosophy succeeded regardless of specific conditions. By autumn, clear patterns distinguished successful cliff dwellings from failures. Successful builders invested time understanding their specific sites, selected compatible materials, and remained flexible in design. Failures resulted from rigid thinking, impatience, and attempts to impose predetermined plans on variable natural formations. The replication challenges taught valuable lessons about vernacular architecture. Principles could transfer, but required intelligent adaptation to local conditions. Tobias's innovation wasn't a blueprint to copy, but a philosophy to apply. This understanding would guide second-generation cliff builders toward even greater achievements. The summer of 1858 revealed advantages of cliff-integrated construction that extended far beyond winter protection. As settlers who survived the Great Freeze rebuilt, many discovered their cliff dwellings provided year-round benefits surpassing conventional structures in every season. What began as cold-weather desperation evolved into recognition of comprehensive environmental harmony. The implications transformed territorial development patterns. Agricultural advantages proved most immediately valuable. The thermal mass that prevented freezing also moderated summer heat. Gardens planted near cliff faces experienced extended growing seasons. Frost arrived 3 weeks later and departed weeks earlier than open ground. Reflected sunlight from rock faces created microclimates supporting crops previously impossible at elevation. The Henderson family harvested tomatoes in October while valley gardens had frozen in September. Water management benefits astounded everyone during the drought of '58. While wells throughout Elk Valley ran dry, cliff dwellings with integrated spring systems maintained steady flow. The geological formations that supported construction also channeled deep groundwater to accessible points. Several families discovered springs during expansion projects, providing irrigation when conventional sources failed. The Whitmore family, now enthusiastic converts, developed terraced gardens watered entirely by cliff seepage. Food preservation capabilities revolutionized frontier economics. The constant cool temperatures in deep cave chambers created natural refrigeration. Butter, milk, and meat stayed fresh for weeks without ice. Vegetables stored in October remained crisp until spring. This preservation capacity allowed families to buy in bulk during harvest, saving money while ensuring varied winter diets. Commercial operations emerged as settlements established community storage chambers modeled on Tobias's system. Workshop advantages attracted craftsmen and small manufacturers. Stable temperatures year-round enabled precision work impossible in structures that froze in winter and sweltered in summer. William Patterson established a clock repair business in his cliff workshop, the consistent environment preventing metal expansion that ruined delicate mechanisms. Furniture makers discovered wood seasoned perfectly in controlled cave environments. The widow Martinez developed a medicinal herb business utilizing various temperature zones for different processing stages. Social benefits emerged unexpectedly. Cliff-dwelling communities developed stronger connections than traditional scattered homesteads. Shared construction projects created bonds. Natural acoustics in cave chambers made musical gatherings popular. Children played safely in interconnected passages during weather that isolated traditional farms. The integrated structures fostered integrated communities. Crime virtually disappeared in cliff settlements where everyone knew neighbors intimately. Health improvements became statistically obvious. Dr. Brighton, studying population health, documented remarkable differences. Cliff-dwelling families experienced 60% fewer respiratory ailments. Consistent temperatures and humidity prevented conditions that fostered disease. Natural ventilation eliminated stale air accumulation. Thermal stability reduced stress on human bodies adapting to temperature swings. Children raised in cliff dwellings showed better growth patterns and fewer chronic conditions. By year's end, territorial assessments showed cliff-integrated structures outperforming conventional buildings in construction cost, maintenance requirements, comfort levels, and resident health. What mockery had dismissed as primitive proved superior by every practical measure. The Great Freeze had forced recognition of winter advantages, but comprehensive benefits were transforming settlement patterns permanently. By 1859, Tobias Brenner had transitioned from solitary innovator to sought-after teacher as demand for cliff-dwelling expertise exceeded his ability to consult individually. He established formal teaching sessions at his original structure, creating the territory's first school dedicated to integrated natural building. Students arrived from across the expanding frontier, representing diverse backgrounds, but united in recognizing conventional construction's limitations after witnessing repeated failures. The curriculum Tobias developed balanced theoretical understanding with practical application. Morning sessions covered geological assessment, reading rock formations, identifying stable structures, and understanding thermal properties of different stone types. He taught water pattern analysis through seasonal observation records accumulated over 8 years. Students learned to identify subtle indicators like lichen growth patterns and mineral deposits that revealed long-term moisture movement. Practical afternoons involved hands-on construction at various stages. Tobias maintained demonstration sections showing proper anchor installation, sealing techniques, and integration methods. Students practiced drilling into different rock types, mixing appropriate sealants, and shaping wood to complement stone contours. The teaching cave became a living laboratory where mistakes provided learning without catastrophic consequences. Advanced courses addressed specific challenges. Military engineers studied fortification applications. Railroad builders focused on tunnel integration. Agricultural specialists learned microclimate optimization. Each group required different emphasis while sharing core principles. Tobias developed specialized modules addressing regional variations. Desert cliff construction differed from mountain applications, requiring modified approaches to thermal mass and water management. The teaching philosophy emphasized observation over prescription. Rather than providing rigid rules, Tobias taught students to read their environments and respond appropriately. He shared failures alongside successes, explaining how early mistakes had refined his understanding. This humble approach resonated with practical builders who distrusted academic theory divorced from experience. Students learned to think with natural forces rather than against them. Notable students spread influence widely. Samuel Crampton adapted cliff-dwelling principles to riverside bluffs, creating flood-resistant homes. Maria Sandoval integrated adobe construction with natural caves in New Mexico, blending cultural traditions with geological innovation. Chen Wei applied concepts to California mining camps, developing worker housing that revolutionized industrial health outcomes. Each success story validated teaching effectiveness while expanding applications. Documentation became crucial as demand exceeded direct teaching capacity. Tobias collaborated with technically trained students to create detailed manuals. Elizabeth Morrison, trained in architectural drawing, produced precise illustrations of construction techniques. Professor Brighton formalized engineering calculations underlying intuitive designs. The resulting publications spread knowledge beyond personal instruction's reach while maintaining practical focus. By 1860, over 300 students had completed training. They established practices throughout Western territories, adapting principles to local conditions. The teaching methodology, combining respect for natural systems with practical construction skills, influenced broader educational approaches. Agricultural colleges began incorporating earth-integrated design. Engineering schools studied vernacular architecture seriously. Military academies added frontier innovation to curricula. Tobias found deep satisfaction in teaching years. Each successful student prevented tragedies like his family's death. Knowledge freely shared multiplied into thousands of safe dwellings. The movement begun in grief had become a legacy of life preservation. Tobias Brenner died peacefully on September 14, 1873, in the cliff dwelling that had sheltered him for 21 years. Students and neighbors found him at his work table, sketching improvements to ventilation systems, having passed while still innovating. The funeral drew hundreds who owed their lives to his teachings. They buried him beside his first family, beneath the cliff that had transformed tragedy into revolutionary innovation that saved countless others. The original structure stood as testament to principles that time validated rather than eroded. Engineers documenting its condition found no significant deterioration after 2 decades of continuous use. The sealed joints remained flexible and waterproof. Anchor points showed no loosening despite extreme temperature cycles. The integration between natural and built elements had actually improved as materials settled into optimal relationships. The dwelling that mockery had predicted would collapse stood stronger than when built. Scientific analysis continued advancing understanding of Tobias's intuitive achievements. The Colorado School of Mines established permanent research stations in various cliff dwellings, documenting performance across decades. Data confirmed thermal mass benefits exceeded theoretical calculations. Integrated structures required 90% less heating fuel than conventional buildings while maintaining superior comfort. Maintenance costs approached zero as natural materials self-regulated. Economic advantages compounded annually. International influence expanded as American innovation gained recognition. Swiss mountain communities adapted techniques for alpine conditions. Chilean architects integrated cliff construction into seismic zones. Australian outback settlements utilized thermal mass principles for desert survival. Japanese builders recognized similarities to traditional practices, finding scientific validation for ancestral wisdom. The frontier innovation had become global knowledge. Modern applications evolved beyond Tobias's imagination. Urban planners incorporated Earth-integrated design into city expansion. Underground transit stations utilized natural climate control. Data centers built into cliffsides eliminated cooling costs. Disaster-resistant communities emerged in tornado and hurricane zones. Each application validated core principles discovered through frontier necessity. The philosophy of working with rather than against natural forces influenced fields from architecture to agriculture. Preservation efforts began immediately. The territory of Wyoming declared Tobias's original dwelling a historical monument. Engineering students maintained the structure while studying its principles. The Brenner Foundation, established by successful students, provided free education in natural building techniques. Publications translated into dozens of languages spread knowledge globally. The legacy lived through principles rather than personality cult. Contemporary relevance increased with environmental awareness. Climate change made Tobias's innovations more crucial as extreme weather intensified. Energy conservation demands highlighted advantages of Earth-integrated construction. Sustainable development found inspiration in vernacular architecture that preceded formal sustainability concepts. The grief-driven innovation of 1852 offered solutions to 21st-century challenges. Today, thousands of structures worldwide incorporate Brenner principles. Modern sustainable architecture recognizes him as pioneering biomimetic design, learning from nature rather than imposing upon it. The cliff dwelling, maintaining comfortable temperatures without fuel, stands as monument to innovation born from necessity. In stone integrated with wood, in chambers carved but not conquered, in communities connected through shared walls, Tobias Brenner's response to tragedy continues sheltering humanity. The mountain he built into rather than against still provides, teaching each generation that harmony with natural forces surpasses any attempt to dominate them.